Thank you. Further debate? I recognize the member from Guelph.
Oh, thank you, Speaker. It's always a pleasure to rise in this House and today to debate third reading of Bill 185, the government's latest housing bill, though only about half of it actually deals with housing, which is kind of surprising when you consider that the biggest crisis facing the people of Ontario is the housing crisis. When we talk about the affordability crisis people are facing, it is being driven by the fact that they simply can't afford to pay the rent or to own a home. But you wouldn't know it from this bill. Like this bill, like many of the government's recent housing bills, spend as much time undoing the mistakes the previous housing minister had done than it does in actually advancing real solutions to addressing the housing crisis. This bill kind of reminds me of a firefighter dealing with a raging forest fire and be given a garden hose or a bucket to try to put it out. That's the extent to which this bill actually addresses the housing affordability crisis. And it's unacceptable. It's unacceptable to the young people, a whole generation of young people, wondering if they'll ever be able to afford to own a home, let alone pay the rent. You know, Speaker, over the last 10 years, average house prices, and I recognize the Liberals and the Conservatives can share responsibility for this, average house prices in the province of Ontario has climbed 180%. Do you know how much income has gone up? 38%. No wonder so many people can't afford to own a home in the province of Ontario. No wonder so many young families are leaving Ontario to other provinces where they can actually find an affordable home. The cost of rent in this province is getting out of control. As a matter of fact, a minimum wage worker in the province of Ontario, just to be able to afford a one-bedroom apartment, would need to earn $25.96 an hour. Our minimum wage isn't even close to that, let alone if you think about people living on social assistance. There is no city in Ontario where a minimum wage worker can afford a one-bedroom apartment. As a matter of fact, in the city of Toronto, it would take a couple, two people, both earning the minimum wage. They couldn't even afford, together, their combined income, couldn't even afford a one-bedroom apartment at 30% of their income. On average, it takes a young person 22 years to be able to save up for a down payment to be able to buy the average home in Ontario. That's even worse if you live in the Greater Toronto Area, where it takes 27 years to save up. And yet the Premier says no to legalizing housing. No wonder 16,000 people in Ontario on any given night are homeless in this province. And it's getting worse, not better, Speaker. Housing starts in April in Ontario were down a whopping 37% from the same month last year. According to CMHC, and I quote, "Over the rest of this year, we expect housing starts to continue to trend down in the province, and particularly in the GTA." Speaker, I know the members opposite will say, oh, it's because of interest rates and labor shortages. But that's not affecting housing starts in other provinces like Alberta, where they're up, British Columbia, where they're having housing starts on a per capita basis that's 2.5 times higher than in Ontario. It is in Ontario, along with a couple of other provinces, where you see the biggest drop in housing starts. The government's not even close to being on track to even meet their own housing target, which many experts are saying won't be sufficient at 1.5 million homes. And yet, the Premier, his response to that, Speaker, has been to be the most powerful NIMBY in Ontario, saying no to fourplexes and four-story as of right province-wide, saying no to legalizing 6 to 11-story buildings along major transit and transportation corridors. Two of the key recommendations from the government's own Housing Affordability Task Force. But Speaker, don't take my word for it. Let's hear what some stakeholders have to say. The Ontario Real Estate Association, led by the former Conservative leader, and I quote, and this is in response to Bill 185, "We are disappointed that the two key recommendations by the province's own Housing Affordability Task Force, strongly supported by Ontario Realtors, have not been included in today's bill. We need to build more homes on existing properties and allow upzoning along major transit corridors if we're going to address the housing affordability and supply crisis in Ontario." Bill 85 says no to that. The Premier has clearly said no to that. But don't just take OREA's word for it. Let's see what More Neighbours, one of the most vocal housing advocates in the province, saying yes in my backyard. And I endorse yes in my backyard, Speaker. And I quote More Neighbours: "The unwillingness of at Ford Nation," this was on social media, "to embrace a generational consensus moment on the biggest issue facing the country is hugely problematic. And while cost changes why some changes in this bill are good, they amount to trying to staunch a forest fire by filling up buckets of water from a kitchen tap. It's been fairly obvious for weeks now that the Ontario government has totally given up on housing. Cutting red tape should mean implementing provincial zoning standards," end quote. You know what those changes are, Speaker? Legalizing fourplexes and four-story, 6 to 11 upzones along major transit and transportation corridors. But the government says no to the fastest, cheapest way we can quickly increase housing supply where we already have infrastructure built. That's the cheapest and fastest way to do it, and the government says no. Speaker, I will concede, and I like to be somebody who works across party lines, I will concede there are some good things in this bill. I've been advocating for advanced timber buildings up to 18 stories. I support the changes to standardized designs to reduce the delays in modular and panelized housing. Though I will say, Speaker, if you talk to most of the people who want those standardized designs, they want them for fourplexes because that's where they can quickly increase housing supply in the most affordable way. I think it's great that this bill is making it easier for universities to build housing. It's unfortunate that the government is underfunding colleges and universities to such an extent that it's going to be hard for them to find the money to actually build the housing. So let's see what these changes amount to tinkering around the edges. And let's see what a journalist, and probably the journalist who works the most on housing issues, has to say, John Michael McGrath from TVO. None of those items from the government's plan is bad, so I agree with him. None of them are bad. But I quote, "They're just not sufficient. In the face of a housing crisis that is every year driving thousands of Ontario residents to more affordable communities in other provinces, the Ford government is fiddling with the dials of housing policy, seemingly unsure of what it's doing or what it's even trying to do. Every new announcement is at least half composed of reversals of announcements from 6, 12, or 18 months ago, and genuinely novel and important bits, like this plan's focus on water and sewer infrastructure, will require a commitment to long-term consistency that this government will have a hard time providing. The rest is simply half measures." End quote. As a matter of fact, if you talk to municipal planning staff, they will tell you that one of the biggest things delaying housing right now is the fact that they don't even know what the rules are anymore because the government keeps changing them every few months. And the cost and time and expense and wasted energy of trying to deal with all the flip-flops is actually delaying housing. Now, the government may actually, I think they are actually, pouring fuel on the fire of the crisis by their changes in this bill and to the provincial policy statement that would effectively wipe out protective settlement area boundaries and the municipal comprehensive plan reviews, essentially regional plannings. They're doing that in order to, just like they did with the Greenbelt scandal, to incentivize, prioritize, and impose costly sprawl on the municipalities. It costs, and why is this so negative? So one, it costs 2.5 times more for a municipality to service low-density sprawl than to service homes that are built in existing urban boundaries where we already have the infrastructure for sewer and water in place. As a matter of fact, and there are changes, ironically, in this bill. So one schedule of the bill repeals their breakup appeal region, and then another section of the bill changes regional planning to the extent that you go from having 11 upper tier governments doing planning to 89 lower tiers, which is going to complicate and delay building even more homes. And their push of sprawl will not only be more expensive, it threatens our farmland. We're losing 319 acres a day. It forces people into expensive commutes. It will make the climate crisis worse and the housing crisis worse. Speaker, we have solutions to the housing crisis. We need to legalize homes so people can build homes in the communities they know and love where we already have infrastructure built, not impose costly sprawl on them.
Questions? I recognize the member from Essex.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I have a question that's very important for rural Ontario residents and farmers, especially residents in the riding of Essex and farmers in the riding of Essex. We have an act that exists right now. It's called the Line Fences Act. And presently, under the existing legislation, there is no particular allowance for electronic notice, nor are people who are non-owners of the land that they are farming automatically allowed to get notice when an application is made under the Line Fences Act. What this proposed legislation does is it cures those two things. This proposed legislation allows for electronic communication to be made under the Act, and in addition to that, requires that the landowner and the occupier be notified when a line fence application is made. I think those are two very important things, especially for rural residents and farmers, because it's often the occupier farmer who pays the cost of the line fence and not the actual owner of the property. So my question to the member is this: does he support those two changes, and will he vote for them?
Response, member from Guelph.
I appreciate the member from Essex question, and his question just really highlights my criticism of this bill. So first of all, yes, anything that will reduce costs and disputes around how we adjudicate disputes around line fences, especially for farmers, is a good thing. And so, as I said in my remarks, Speaker, there are some positive elements of this bill. But what the question misses, and what this schedule of the bill misses, is that we're in the biggest housing crisis this province has ever faced. It's getting worse. Housing starts are going down. People's ability to pay the rent is unaffordable. A whole generation of young people are wondering if they'll ever be able to afford to own a home. And while this bill has some positive elements like changes to the Line Fences Act, it is wholly insufficient to even come close to addressing the scale of the housing crisis we're facing. It's as if the government's waving the white flag and saying, we give up on fixing the housing crisis. Well, Speaker, I want young people to know I'm not giving up. Greens aren't giving up on fixing the housing crisis, and I will continue to come into this House each and every day to fight for real solutions so everyone in this province can afford to own a home and pay the rent.
Further question, I recognize the member from Mushkegowuk, James Bay.
Thank you, Speaker. You know, we see the housing crisis is all over, and Northern Ontario is no better. You know, we see a lot of people there. They want to move in. I call them des maisons de transition, so that they could sell their house, put their house on market, and maybe move into a small apartment or an apartment. Yet we don't have that, and we have a small university that can't even, give some housing for students because there's no housing available, or des dortoirs, what you call it, des dortoirs, so that the students can live on campus. That don't exist. There is a couple of rooms, that's it. But there's such affordable housing, sustainable housing, supportive housing. It's max waiting times for 2-3 years. Do you believe, and my question, do you believe this bill, this red tape reduction, will fix that situation, not only for Northern Ontario, but I can see we hear in this House over and over, it's across Ontario. Do you think that will fix this issue or help fix this issue?
Response, the member from Guelph.
Yeah, I appreciate the member's question. The short answer is no, it's not going to fix the housing crisis. I'm going to give you 2 quick responses to that. So the first is, I've talked a lot in my remarks and in debate here of how we can change the market conditions to build more market housing that people can afford in the communities they know and love. But I also know it's true that until the provincial and federal governments get back into providing the financial support to build nonprofit co-op and supportive housing, we will not solve the housing affordability crisis. We need market and non-market solutions. And when it comes to the market solutions, legalizing fourplexes is critically important, not only in urban areas, but in rural areas. I can't tell you, when I was doing my winter tour of rural parts of the province, including in the north, people told me, especially seniors, they want to be able to downsize into a fourplex in the community they know and love and not be forced to move away from where they grew up or where they've raised their family.
Further questions? I recognize the member from Kitchener-Conestoga.
Oh, thank you very much, Madam Speaker. And it's a pleasure to be able to rise and take part in debate with my colleague from just across the way in Guelph. And let's talk a little bit about for as of right. I know that's something that's kind of come up a little bit today and obviously in committee. And it's interesting that roughly 70% of the province already has as of right for fourplexes that's been delineated through the municipality. And I would like to ask, I know Mayor Guthrie in Guelph is supportive of fourplexes, and I'm sure that he'll have the ability to make them as of right in his municipality. And I'm curious, and there's no malice in this question at all. It's just why wouldn't you want municipalities to be able to have the right to be able to go ahead and say that? Why mandate it? Why not let local decision makers make those local decisions in their municipalities?
Response, the member from Guelph.
I appreciate my neighbor in Kitchener's question, because we're in a housing crisis. Because we have a whole generation of people who simply cannot afford a home because we don't have enough homes. And the government is imposing expensive, low-density sprawl on the municipalities and onto those individuals. Now, let's be clear. If you legalize fourplexes and four-story, that's not mandating that you have to do it. It just means you have the right to build it if you want it. That's how we did housing all over Ontario up until the 1960s and 70s, when we started bringing in all these exclusionary zoning restrictions that prevented people from building that kind of housing. Also, legalizing 6 to 11 story along major transit and transportation corridors. I've talked to builders. Those 2 changes, legalizing fourplexes, legalizing 6 to 11 story along major transportation corridors, would cut building times in over half. We're in a crisis. We're in a race against time. We need to increase housing supply, and at least on this side, among the Green Caucus, we're going to fight to be able to build homes as fast as we can at the lowest cost we can in the communities people love.
Further questions? I recognize the member for Hamilton Mountain.
Thank you, Speaker. Thank you to the member from Guelph for his part in debate today. In Hamilton, we have close to 1,900 people who are homeless, and visibly they say 263, but I think that number is way larger than that, just going around the city and seeing the amount of tents and the amount of people that are packed into those tents. In the last 10 years, we've lost 16,000 units that were under $750. They were affordable homes. Today we don't see that. To every one home that's built, affordable home that's built, we're losing 4 to the private market rental. And so we're just like falling further and further and further behind. Do you agree with New Democrats that this bill is not the fix that people are so desperate for, who are living rough on the streets, and this is the solution that they're looking for? Are we going to find it in this bill?
Response, member from Guelph.
Well, the short answer to the member from Hamilton is no, you're not going to find that in this bill. Let's just look at that radical organization called Scotiabank, okay? They say that in the province of Ontario, if we're going to address the chronic homeless crisis and the affordability crisis in housing, we need the government to get back into helping investing in nonprofit co-op and supportive housing. As a matter of fact, Scotiabank, that radical organization, says we need to build 250,000 government-supported, deeply affordable nonprofit co-op and permanent supportive housing. So what I'm tired of in this whole housing debate is it seems like some people think only the market's going to solve it, and some people think only the government's going to solve it. Well, I would say we need both and all hands on deck. We need to legalize housing so the market can build more homes that people can afford in the communities they know and love. And we need the government, as Scotiabank advises, to actually step in and do what they stopped doing in 1995, is build nonprofit co-op and deeply affordable homes. 93% of the deeply affordable homes in this province were built before 1995. That's when the government stopped doing it.